welcome to the presentation of the results of the interviews that I've conducted this past month for the state of Valais. My name is Laurent. If you were interviewed, we met in person, so I'm doing this video from my office in the mountains to share with you the results. And I'm going to use basically the data that you yourself have access to. So what you see here on the screen is the website. You have the address and you can have access directly to the information, the same as I'm going to use. So you can see the interviewees. I put a bit of information about the process, the fact that the answers were anonymized, for example, and also I put a little map of all the locations that I've visited in beautiful Valais. So I'm going to use the story mode here, but I want to emphasize the fact that if you use the arrows here, you can go by yourself into the data and you have different visualizations. So one is the tree map. There's one called the sunburst, which I find very interesting. But there is also the circles, where you can really see the weight of the different types of answers that I got. Also worth noting that on every visualization, you can filter the results by type of respondents. So this is only the industry people, this is researchers, this is the trainers, and this is what I call innovation support, which is people around the ecosystem, like the venture capitalists, for example, or people who were slightly outside of the ecosystem, but with good ideas about how to innovate. So I'll use the story mode because this is where I picked I go into each category of result and trying to find the key insights. So let's start with the different types of, sorry, I'm using the wrong navigation, it's the one at the top now. So the one first finding is that in the answers, I got more than 330 answers. The most requested types of feedback were around people, around recruitment, for example. The second most important was around communication. Third came services. And then we have like less important categories like capital, information, education, and space. If we look at the subcategory, so these big categories are divided into different types of feedback. I'll dive into that later. But you see that people, it's about building the community, about the recruitment, about matching people inside the ecosystem with something that they specifically need. For the services, there's different types of services that are requested. I think this is probably the most useful view right now, this particular screen, about what the ecosystem is asking. So let's dive into that. I already mentioned that you can filter at the bottom the result. This is what trainers need, for example, and this is what researchers need, very different things. I'll let you play with that. So what is the main request? The main request is community building. People want to be connected within the existing ecosystem. Second most requested demand, feedback, it's public relations. The ecosystem really needs help with promoting what it does to the world. And then there are three that came ex aequo. The first one is recruiting. I think that this is the low-hanging fruit of this ecosystem. And then there was the idea of rebranding the image of Valais as a canton that has a lot of industry, because people think about ski and wine, but why not also have them think about industry? And then ex aequo, number 3 request was matchmaking. So let's dive deeper into each of these categories. So let's start with education. The root of this project is the idea to build a new generation training center for the CFTI using the land that is available right now in Sierre. So when people give me feedbacks about what they need regarding education, apprentissage, training in Valais, there were two main categories of feedback. One was we need to improve the cursus and the content that we teach to the students. The other is that we need to attract more trainees. So cursus improvement, the main suggestion is really like to connect industry and the trainers more closely. I think, it's always something that everybody wants that to happen. The question is more, how do you make it happen? But it was very interesting to get all this feedback because it's still a constant effort and a constant need that training is much more as connected as possible to the needs of people on the ground who would then end up recruiting the trainees. The second thing is really about attracting talent. So, I mean, this comes up in different categories. I put it here because it's specifically people who said we want more trainees. Also, we want to attract more trainers, or we want to make education more attractive for the trainers. But you could also consider that this is a redundant category with recruiting, which I put into people, which is one of the most requested things. So just keep in mind, there's here we have 7 feedback about let's attract more apprentis, let's attract more trainers. But add that on top of the 50 feedback of people say we really struggle to recruit. And also in the category of people saying let's change the perception of the industry, especially towards parents. So all this ties together, you'll see a bit later in the data. But the point is, there is a huge effort that needs to happen to attract more trainees, and whatever can be done is going to be very useful for the ecosystem. We're switching from education, so feedback on the needs when it comes to training, to space, physical space. So 3 types of space were required. The first one obviously is training space. So currently some of the infrastructure is really obsolete, and there's an imbalance in the profile of respondents. There were 6 people from the training with a training background, like 30 people with an industry background. So that's why it looks like it's a small number of people requesting it. But if I had interviewed more people from the training space, I would probably have as many answers as there were people. But there is a strong need for training space that is up to date to today's standards. Working space was also a request by quite a lot of people. You see here we have 10 feedback on that. And specifically, there was always concerns about the lack of flexibility of the existing rental agreements. So, you have to commit for 5 years. And it's too much, especially for early stage projects, innovative projects. And also there were, I think it's very important to mention that industrial space have very specific requirements in terms of the weight of stuff you can put on the ground, having some machines, having access for trucks. This is really something that has to be kept in mind. And this is not regular offices. This is like industrial ready offices and workshops that are demanded. Also, the event and the social infrastructure is lacking, so there is no real hub for the community to meet up. And also I spoke to people who said, I would love to organize bigger events. I would love to draw international crowds to Valais, but we do not have the infrastructure to sit down 700-800 people in a world-class conference center as of now. This is now the services. All the feedbacks regarding services. So different things came up, and we're going to dive into them. But I think one of the idea that I liked the most was, there was a little bug here in the navigation. Sorry about that. I will make sure that this gets corrected. So the first thing is I call that the industry success team. So it's what people told me, not in these terms, but I came up with this name to put everything together. But I think it's a good name. You know how some companies, when they become so massive, they have people working for them, but helping others navigate their own complexity. If you think of Amazon or Google, if you work with Google or Amazon, there's someone who actually is your account manager who's going to help you navigate the hundreds and hundreds of products that these companies have and that you're not supposed to know. And I think the state is at the same point a little bit when it comes to interacting with the industry. There are so many mechanisms, there are so many services that people report being a bit lost. And so what they want is a facilitated access to all these services. And so it could be done by naming someone who's the one single entry point for all these industrialists to get into, to interact with the state and then be redirected to the people that will serve them. It's interesting to see, that this is like a lot of industry people asking for it, but also a lot of entrepreneurs, and basically it's quite evenly spread across the population, but obviously this is most requested by the industrial people. So Simplification, unsurprisingly, came up. A lot of people asking, let us work, don't put too much regulation, don't make administrative tasks too complex. I mean, this is probably one of the oldest tension between a state and the people it administers. It came up, obviously. Also, something that I found very interesting, I was not expecting from the feedback, is what I ended up calling an employee success team. So a lot of people said, we are able to recruit foreigners, for example, and we convince them to come to Valais, but then they face a lot of problems. And we know that if they don't manage to solve these problems, they are probably going to leave. So could you help us? Could you help these people settle, which would then help us because we wouldn't have to deal with employees leaving after 1 or 2 years because they couldn't find housing or they couldn't, connect with the local community, etc. Sandbox was one of the very early ideas. It came up all across the interviews. And I think it came up in the first interview, and so it stayed in the back of my mind, and I find it so interesting. So some people said we need a sandbox, some people said we need a testing ground, a testing platform, we need an open sky lab, but it's the same idea. It's like we have innovative technologies that need to be deployed, that need to gather real life data, that need to get feedback from real customers. Could the state facilitate that deployment? Because right now it's very hard. So I think it's one of these like quick win, quite easy to deploy idea that should really be considered. Is there a place where I could go as like, this is my technology, like, and somebody helps you put it out there in a few days, and then you can really start to gather very useful data and make it better and go into your lean startup iteration mode. So this also consulting came up. So this is, I don't think, an opportunity for the state, but more for the private sector. But there's definitely a need for consulting right now because industry has to integrate a lot of new things like automation, cybersecurity, all these new forms of technologies that are coming. And they don't really have time and they don't really have the skills internally. So hopefully we have some consulting company who will end up jumping on this and serving the ecosystem. There was a request for an administrative shared service center. So this one, I think some of these things are already done, but maybe they're done for younger projects, for early stage projects, not for later projects. But it would be worth investigating whether what already exists, I think of CMARC, etc., what if already exists could be given to more actors, or maybe it's just that there is a communication issue here and there's actually some services that people are just unaware of, but it's worth investigating further. The next category of feedback is on people. So, the term was maybe a bit ambiguous, but now you'll understand why I called it people. So a lot of very interesting points in there. The number one feedback is inside the people category. It's community building. It's like, help us become a real community. Community between the members of the ecosystem, community between the state and the members of the ecosystem. So many things came up. It's worth like stopping on every one of these feedback. But the point is, we have an incredible high quality ecosystem, and it's nobody's job to actively connect it right now. And that should really change. So what could be done that someone would, dig into the ecosystem and organize events and put people together and give it a name maybe to this community and promote it, speak about it, use it as a way to intervene, to speak in the media, for example. I mean, everything is to be done at this stage, but I think it's a huge opportunity. And when you look at what's reported by the people, the interviewees, I mean, everything's there. It's like, why not have a pollinizer, somebody whose job is just to create connections between the ecosystem? What about connecting with the Valaisans who live abroad and reach out to them and create connections to them? Let's remove the silos, make it become a social marker, like make sure that when somebody comes into the community, it really helps their status. And so the downside is that maybe not everyone can come. There must be conditions, but it has to be a community that is worthy of people's time and brings them really something. There's a lot of feedback on connecting Obervallis and Valais, which also I think is something that has been discussed in your part of the world for a very long time, but obviously also came up here. Recruiting, it came up as one of the most requested thing, and I mean this is probably even underrepresented. Maybe some people did not mention it because it was so obvious to them, and or maybe they didn't expect the state could help them. But I mean, recruiting was, in my opinion, the number one thing that should be taken care of right now, because almost everyone I met that was running a company said, we have 5, 10, 40, 100 openings right now that we really struggle to fill. So what could be done to attract more talent, the qualified workers that the state needs? How can we get them to move to Valais? How can we train more people? This was a bit earlier in the data, but it's redundant with that. There's a talent shortage. We have too many openings. We need 40 people to install solar panels. This is really something that we could carefully look at and do something. I mean, I think right now, the way people think about recruiting is like, let's put ads on more job boards. I think like something else should be done. For example, actively moving to other regions and try to promote Valais, and there's like a bus and people can see the openings. They can immediately sit down and sign a working contract or something. I mean, it's something a bit radical has to be done because we know there is people looking for jobs everywhere. But probably the biggest problem with remaining competitive right now for Valais industry is finding the right talent. I visited factories where part of the factory was stopped because there were not enough people. I mean, this really needs to stop. Involve women in the industry, so that earlier in earlier classification of the data, I put that into recruiting, but I kind of singled it out because I think it's a very interesting idea. It's like, okay, one of the things that needs to happen is more diversity within the staff of industrial companies, but also like tap into that reservoir of talent that is women that is currently not really addressed, and to compensate for the talent shortage. So how could industrial jobs be more attractive to women, and also women play a key role in the relocation of their partner, a lot of the men who are signing working contracts. So there's some other effects, positive effects to involve and communicate specifically with that community. Matchmaking, so you could argue that matchmaking was part of community. It's a bit the same idea, but matchmaking is like a lot of people actually, you see there's a lot of feedback, requested specific connection. They didn't say, connect us to the community, they like, connect us to this particular type of person. So that's why I singled it out into matchmaking. And so it's like, okay, connect researchers and the market, connect, help me find my first client, which came up a lot of time, help me connect to people that are outside of Switzerland. The first client thing is super interesting, or help us with connecting to the digital world, which we're not really connected as an industry. So I think, this is like targeted community building, which also would be very easy and very fruitful to address. Then we have events. So events are an amazing tool to build an ecosystem, and they are requested under different forms. So big events to get the world's attention, to connect the community, learning events, discovery events where I could visit a factory and see what my neighbors are doing. I like some very simple idea like the Tischmesser events. It's like invite all the buyers from Valais and have all the industrial companies of Valais display their product. Just that would make such a difference, because it seems that maybe your neighbor is building the product you need, and that you might be buying from the other side of the planet. So I think that would really reinforce a bit the ecosystem, and that's super simple to do. I think it was done in the past. Coaching is mentioned. So coaching already does happen in a lot of forms in Valais, but so this is further proof that it's a need. Two things here. One is maybe the people coaching currently the industrial ecosystem should make more noise about their service so that more people know about them. Or second, also, maybe the nature of coaching needs to be to evolve a little bit. And there was a lot of mention of frustration, especially from entrepreneurs who said, like, I would like the coaches like to be people who really have a strong experience in the industry, so that they can be peers. Quality of life, so that's a huge asset in Valais. It definitely has to remain like that. I mean, there's not a lot of specific feedback, but I think the main idea here is like, let's keep on developing the infrastructure, and let's keep on finding a balance between quality of life and economical development, and keeping the values of the canton intact. Communication, it was the second most important theme after people. So let's dive into it. The main request, and I think it's a great idea, it's like rebrand the image of Valais. So Valais in people's mind is wine and ski, and maybe a place that is a bit far away from the world. But the reality is that Valais is mountains and ski, but also industry. And by the way, Valais is probably more the center than anything else, because when you look at the map, in a globalized world and people moving, like it's 1 hour away from Italy and France and Germany and Swiss Germany, etc. So, I mean, Valais is the center. Valais is a place of innovation. Valais has a lot of industry. Let's actively rebrand the canton's image around these ideas. And that will help the employer's brand, that will help attracting people, that will help luring talent into moving into a region where they will find a quality of life and an interesting job. A lot of things to dive into here, but this is a very, very important idea. And kind of the sister idea was rebranding the image of the industrial sector. So a lot of people in their mind, industry is like polluting, dangerous, unsafe, it involves a lot of strength, and it's only for men who carry heavy stuff. The thing is, and I've visited a lot of your factories, is that it's not a reality anymore. And that perception that the new industry, which is working towards decarbonization, it's safe, it's decent, it's normal working hours, the strength is not involved anymore, it's jobs that can be done by women, at least a lot of them. So let's get that message out there, and let's help public change perception, which will impact recruitment, and which will impact how many trainees sign up for industrial jobs. And at a time where people want more authentic things, they want to get rid of the so-called bullshit jobs, industry has a card to play. I mean, it's I thought that I saw much happier employees in your factories than I saw in a lot of service sector companies, with a lot of people that are bored at their desk pretending to be busy playing solitaire. Public relation was a very big issue too. So, you guys are very good at doing some crazy, high quality, innovative products, but you're not very good about spreading the message that you're doing that. So during my time interviewing with Valais, I ended up finding companies working with Apple, with Tesla, with NASA, with so many incredible global players, but nobody is speaking about it. And you guys really need help, because that would make a huge difference. So not sure how this is done, but this is what we need to look at. That someone who wants to help the ecosystem has to look at this problem. How can you develop, how can you tell the story of Valais? How can you celebrate the people doing amazing things? How can we get the world's attention by showing all the amazing innovation and products that are coming out of this canton? Endorsement, let me explain what I mean by that. I think that in terms of communication, especially when you're a startup or you're a young project, if a larger institution endorses you, it changes the game for you. So I think that it came up in the feedback, and what this means, let's have the state endorse quality Valais project in one way or another, and then this project can benefit from their own achievements, but also people will be reassured by the fact that the state says this is a good project, we endorse it, we support it, and that will make a difference when raising money or talking to the media, for example. Innovation culture, so this is a big one. Innovation culture is the basis of everything, and it's very different from the culture that worked in factories for years. You guys in a factory, you have to produce, you have to make sure that the quality is high, you have to work on micro savings, because when you save 1 cent on 5 million products, it makes a huge difference. And innovation works differently. You have to try things, you have to fail, you have to waste money to find out that your ideas are not good. And so there was a lot of mentions about let's develop a stronger culture of innovation in complement to the culture of production that exists in the canton. After communication, let's dive into feedback that revolves around information. So 2 types of information that the ecosystem needs. Data, and you've heard the sentence, data is the new oil. Data is so useful, so important in today's world to develop new services, new products. So this is the types of data that people were requested, whether it's like data on on the sector in general, like what are the average salaries, so that when we recruit someone, we have a reference point. It's industrial data from plants, from dams, from people's usage of electricity or whatever, like usage data, industrial data. And so there were mention of templates or contracts, which is a form of data too. So a lot of requests here. And then inspiration came up quite often. I mean, we have we have 9 feedback here, 9 out of 45 responses. 25% of people are asking for it. It's like, okay, feed us with ideas from the outside. I mean, Valais is such a beautiful place. You don't really have to live. In that way, you have the same problem than Americans. They don't have to travel because their country is so big and they have everything. You also have everything in Valais, but the problem is that sometimes it cuts you off from new ideas, from challenging ideas, from people doing new things. And so it came out under that form, and this is something that can be addressed quite easily through building bridges with foreign ecosystem, doing events, etc. The last category is capital. So it's the one I was expecting to come out the most. Like people say, okay, let us work, but give us some money. I thought that would be the request. As you see, things have been much more interesting than that. But still, capital came up. And so I separated the feedback into 3 categories. So the first one is facilitated access to capital. What I mean by that is that it's very interesting that the most requested thing is not give us some money. It's like, connect us to the people who have money and help us get money from these investors. And I think it's a very good idea. Why? Because professional investors bring a lot more than capital. They have network, they have experience, they know how to filter the great projects. They know how to make projects better. They have experience with selling companies, with growing companies. But the state can really help industrialists and startups connect and convince these people to wire money. And so this is how it came up. And the idea would be to, on one end, maybe make an inventory of all the investors that we have in Valais and around Valais. And then on the other end, we look at the projects and then connect the dots between both. There was mention of a direct investment fund, which I think is in the works right now. And it's a great idea too. It's like we have so many federal mechanisms. Why not have a Valais fund that invests in projects, and then first is going to help innovation, but also if a project succeeds a lot, then it gets back, the money comes back to the canton, which is very interesting because obviously these projects will have emerged thanks to the efforts of the ecosystem and the canton, so there should be some returns to the ecosystem. I'll let you read through the feedback. There's a lot of mentions here around cantonal fund. There was also people mentioning that the bank, the Valais, the cantonal bank should be more willing to take risks. Grants and loans, people asking for tax cuts, people asking for loans from the, it's another form of financing. So you see that we cover basically 3 forms of financing: access to the existing investors, direct investment through a fund, and also like tax breaks and loans from the states. What I like here is that there was the idea of, putting forward the fact that a loan is an interesting mechanism because it puts the money in the pocket of a project, but also it puts pressure on the people carrying the project to deliver within a certain amount of time, and they still have responsibility, which is a healthy form of pressure to put on an entrepreneur. So this is the results. I went as fast as I could, but as you see, you could spend hours looking at this data. So I encourage you to have a look. I showed you earlier, you have different visualizations available, and you can just spend your time into them and look at the feedback. If you have any questions, you can contact me or Sophia, and I look forward to hear your feedback. Thank you very much, all of you, for taking the time to meet with me and to share your perspective. I hope that this is going to be useful for you and for your future projects. Thank you very much.